Um, yeah, welcome folks. Today might be a short one, I think as mentioned, but we can go ahead and go through. Just to start, if there's anybody who is new here and or wants to give a quick introduction for themselves, please feel free to unmute and do so.
Hello, I am newish. I used to participate way back when, but kind of stopped. So my name is Vladimir Vivian. I'm with VMware. About a couple of years ago, I started the E2E framework project as a way to help folks write Kubernetes tests without depending on the intrinsic built-in Kubernetes test framework. So this one is completely independent. So yeah, so I'm kind of came back to we'll be trying to participate more and more in the Sig-Testing meetings as often as possible.
Awesome, great to have you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, if anybody else also wants to unmute and introduce themselves, feel free.
I'm one of the co-chairs. I've been around for months or something of that sort. I'm listening today.
Yep. All right, I think that's good. All right, with that said,
Benjamin just showed up. I wouldn't be surprised if he's got something to say, right?
yeah, Ben, if you have anything to add to the agenda, feel free.
Oh no, I don't have any agenda items. I just wanted to check in. Sorry I'm late.
No worries. Yo. All right, I think with that said, Vladimir, I think you've got the agenda item, so go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I'm the lead for the E2E framework, which is a Sig-Testing sponsored project, and it's been around for a couple years now. I decided to kind of jump back in and try to participate as much as possible because the project is actually gaining momentum and getting adopters. So this is the one place that I know where we can have continuous face-to-face with the community. So definitely want to jump back in and put my face in the meeting and participate so that if folks have any questions about the project. The last thing that just happened is I had a chance to finally do a release last week or last weekend, I don't remember, version 0.2. And again, the project is, when it first started, it was I wrote a lot of code, but for the last couple of years, it's been community driven completely, which is great. And folks are adding things that they want to see, and the project is healthy. And like I said, it's getting adopted. I don't know if there's any question, but I can just talk about the project if there's no question. Oh, it looks like somebody already added the link. I was about to add the link. So if you don't know about the E2E framework, like I said, like I mentioned, it is a standalone project, not standalone in the sense that it helps you write tests against a running cluster. It has zero dependencies. As far as external framework, you basically use Go test tooling to run your tests. Other than that, it's you writing your tests using Go. The project comes with several support tools to help you write your tests. One being it has built-in support for starting a kind cluster as you run your tests. So you can, with literally one line of code, tell it to start kind as part of your setup sequence for the test. And once that's done, you'll have a handle to the to the client that's already configured and pointing to your kind cluster. And then from there, you can write your tests. And then you also have handles to kind of hook into the shutdown sequence of the tests. So you can take control there as well. And obviously the tests themselves, they're written in pure Go test functions. The only thing is there's a kind of a builder pattern that you get with the project that allows you to do some further setup of your tests, even inside the test function. So you can do things like labeling your tests, give it a name so you can see in the report which test was running. The main thing is you get access to a Kubernetes client that allows you to run your tests and have access to the API server. There are other supporting tooling or APIs that you get, such as there's a wait API, which is a wrapper of I think it's API machinery wait, but it's a little bit simpler to use, where you can, during your tests, set up wait conditions to wait for a specific condition to become true before the test can proceed. There is also, I'm trying to kind of remember, but maybe it'll be better if I just go and look. One of the things that was done with this latest release is actual documentation, or I should say better documentations, instead of just having to read the example. So now you can go and see some documented stuff, and you can read about some of the supporting features. Let me see. So, there are things like you can, when you run your test, you can specify how you want the behavior of the test, meaning you can provide skip labels or inclusion labels of the tests that you wanna see executed. And that's weird. Did GitHub change their UI?
They did this morning. And they
I'm
also
looking,
had
I'm
an
like, where's
outage.
my code?
Yeah, you have to click. There's a new
Oh,
button,
yeah, I see it.
overview and code. Yeah,
I see.
that threw me
Oh
this
my
morning too.
I'm like, am I like, no, okay. All right, good to know. So like I said, now you have docs, you can read and jump directly to different examples in the tests. So like I said, you could do filtering. Somebody added examples on how to add your own CLI flags if you want to even more customization. You can test custom. Somebody provided ways to do to test CRDs, custom resources. I'm just going down the list of examples. Parallel, you can execute tests in parallel. And like I said, you can do, resource watch is another thing you can do, but you also have conditions where you can set up conditions, as I had mentioned earlier. Yeah, so like I said, I wanted to kind of hop in and hopefully be able to participate more often, just so that if folks, since the project is actually getting a little bit of attention in the community, just kind of jump and provide a face for the project in case folks have questions.
I got a question or two.
Absolutely.
I assume the question in the channel's been answered by Ben. Maybe for folks not looking in the chat, check the chat for a question. My question is just to be very specific and clear about what you're talking about. You're talking about the test framework used in the Kubernetes test directory for E2E and stuff of that sort?
No, that was one of the driving motivation for this, because we didn't want to because the test that's in Kubernetes has its own framework. It uses I think it uses Ginkgo,
Okay.
and it's very closely coupled with Kubernetes itself. And if I'm creating a project, and at least 2 years ago when this started, that was the state of things. I don't know if things have changed since then. And it was, a bit difficult to kind of vendor that. So this project, one of the motivation of this project is, hey, you don't need trying to, reuse what's in Kubernetes, because again, it's very tightly coupled and organically grown with Kubernetes.
I
But
see,
this
that
is
makes a lot
saying,
more sense. I'm glad you explained this.
okay, yeah, this is saying this is a tool you can use to write tests without having to depend on what's in Kubernetes.
I didn't know this was separate and available. I'm going to look more closely at it for use in my company.
There was
Okay.
actually a KEP about staging the existing E2E framework thing, the old one, and like this was kind of like building this was kind of suggested as an alternative. I'm
Mhm.
really thankful for Vladimir taking that over. I think there's a lot of tech debt. Organic growth is a nice way of putting it in the existing E2E framework, and we've made work to improve it, but that's kind of at its own pace, and it's a lot more challenging with the thousands of existing test cases.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of oddball Kubernetes tied half-baked concepts in there around things like providers that are going to take a lot of effort to extricate.
Right.
And you could build something a lot lighter if you could start from scratch today, like this project has, because the rest of the ecosystem has evolved. Like when Kubernetes adopted Ginkgo early on, Go didn't have a way to do control flow for like cleanup.
Right.
They had added test main, but that was it, is test main and test, and you had no way to do things like cleanup. You had no way to get structured output out of Go tests. So I think even Ginkgo didn't have that, how Kubernetes wanted, and there's a custom JUnit reporter until Ginkgo v2.
Right.
There's been some really major changes to the entry one to switch to like Ginkgo v2 and clean up a bunch of this stuff, but it still has a ton of tech debt. And I would say for most projects, unless you like this particular style and want to use Ginkgo and Omega and things, I think it's a little bit more Go-like to use this E2E framework that Vladimir's been building that uses some of the more modern Go concepts and doesn't depend on all these really heavy dependencies.
Right. Yeah, thank you for adding that. And that's exactly what it is. It was kind of a reset of what was, and a lot of the concepts that are in here, I took when we were first starting, took a good few days to look at what folks have been doing inside Kubernetes, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. Stuff like the ability to wait for a condition. We wanted that. The ability to construct objects with fragments. We wanted that. So some of the stuff is in there. The ability to test CRDs to make sure that you can actually not just workload objects, but also any kind of custom objects. Yeah, I see a couple
We're
of
getting
hands.
questions. We have 2 questions now.
Yes, I guess Brady Pratt, since that's the leftmost hand on my screen.
Yeah. Brady.
Oh, Brady, I'm sorry. I said Brady.
He's not coming out. You're muted, Brady. We can't hear you. Oh, okay. He's can't unmute.
Okay. All right, Matt, go ahead.
Is the intended audience for this tool basically the same as the Kubernetes and tests, or do they differ?
So originally the intention was not to basically leave Kubernetes as it is, because as Ben mentioned, it has its own cadence, its own pace. This is more for folks who are building tools and want an easy way to test. If you're building on top of Kubernetes, you want to test whatever you're building. This would be the tool, rather than you going and recreating your own test framework and end up at a place very close to this. Why not just use this as a starting point? So that's the intended audience. But the stuff that maintain testing for Kubernetes completely separate. But I mean, in the some sort of future, if somebody is brave enough and have a lot of time and they want to explore using some of this for Kubernetes, they're welcome to. But for now, the two projects are intended to be separate.
We have an enormous mountain of tests in Kubernetes. That stuff is mostly in maintenance mode, and we've had some iterative improvements, but it's not something where we can go back and say, oh, let's build something for everyone to use. That's this project. So the audience is a bit different. The test framework in Kubernetes is used by the tests in Kubernetes for testing Kubernetes itself. With the exception of the conformance program, those tests aren't super useful if you're doing other things other than developing Kubernetes itself. The conformance test and a handful of the other tests may be useful if you're developing like a Kubernetes distro or something. But if you're developing Kubernetes applications, then you would want to be looking at Vladimir's project instead of the things we have in Kubernetes. There's a couple of good ideas in those tests. There's a bunch of bad ideas as well, and a lot of tech debt, and porting it to another framework is not a task that I think we have staffed in the foreseeable future. There's just so many tests.
It is.
I think the biggest thing that we're doing with that is just trying to keep them rolling forward with the ecosystem as much as we can, and trying to decouple them a bit from even some of the tests in Kubernetes are like coupled to the clustered tools like kubeup.sh, and we didn't want that concept coming back as well. But it's going to be very hard to remove that. There's a really large context object that gets passed around in the entry framework that just has a snarl of fields in it, but trimming those out is a lot of work, and it doesn't have super obvious return on investment for people versus just working on a clean slate for developing applications and add-ons and so on.
Cool.
Great, thank you both.
Yeah, I see. I was going back to the chat, and I see that Brady mentioned that he is using the existing E2E test framework. Thanks for that. And the thing that's very interesting that he mentioned is that he is using it with Ginkgo. So one of the plus side of taking the simplified pure Go test function is that you can integrate that test in any existing tool that you already have. Because again, it's just regular pure Go test functions, so that you can, if you like Ginkgo, you can use it with Ginkgo. You could possibly not even use, I don't know if anybody has the project pulled up, but there's a specific package name client with a K, and I intentionally pulled that out with the intent maybe at some later point down the line, maybe pull that to be its own thing. Its own simplified way of managing Kubernetes client Go client. But you could use that with your existing test framework, and you get the same, you get the same benefits, even if you didn't want to use this project E2E test framework. So that's good to hear that somebody is using it with Ginkgo. And the other thing I didn't mention, but past releases, one of the things I worked on in the previous release was the integration with kubetest 2. So you can, if you're already using kubetest 2, or you know, you looking, if you're already using Sig-Testing, you could still use E2E test framework. You let Sig-Testing set up your and tear down your environment, and then E2E test framework will actually run your tests. Yeah, go ahead, McLean.
Brady, not Brady, Vladimir. It's you're mentioned client with a K. That sounds cool, and it sounds like you're drawing attention to it. I recommend you put a section in the README. You know, talk it up a little bit, because
Yeah.
I don't think it's easy to spot the virtues of that thing.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I probably should add it in the doc that the intent of that package is to show that you can, I wanted to get to a point where we have another layer of abstraction on top of what's available with Client Go. And that's what Client with a K does. It's kind of, actually what one of the things it's doing, it's reusing, God, what's the, it's reusing another project and the name controller runtime. So the client there, I like what they were doing, so I was like, let me wrap some of that and hide some of the complexity. So whether or not you're using a type client or generic client, it doesn't matter. It hides all that. It makes that decision for you and hides it for you. And gives you something you can just use. And what else is in there? All the like one of the contribution, I think it was last year that somebody did, was the ability to encode basically any kind of arbitrary YAML chunk. You can pass it to the client and it'll give you it'll realize the objects for you. So which is very useful in tests, especially if you have something that's very structured and you don't want to take time to kind of, or you're not even sure what the structure is. You can pass it the YAML chunk and it'll give you a realized object. So there's a lot of good things in there that I'm like, well, I would like to see this in a generalized API, not just for testing. So, but it's a good fertile ground to kind of play around with these ideas and, you know, hopefully time permits, push them further up the stack as far as maybe, you know, other SIGs that may be interested. Yeah, so if there's not any more questions, let me see. Look at the. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any more questions.
I don't see anything.
Yeah, so if there's no more question, I'll stop talking and yield the floor for the rest of the meeting. But thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks for going through that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really cool, Vladimir. I'm going to look at it closely.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right. Yeah, last minute, if anybody has anything else that they want to talk about, feel free. Otherwise, I think we can call it good for today.
I just want to add, if folks are interested in the topic, this applies more to the entry framework, but we actually just had some publications ahead of KubeCon about like how to write good E2E tests and best testing practices. I think there'll be some overlap there. Pretty interesting from one of our recent SIG leads,
Awesome.
Patrick. And I believe that our SIG talk this time at for the folks that are in Amsterdam is on this subject.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a great blog post.
Vladimir, if you can catch some time with them, I would recommend connecting up with Antonio and Patrick, who are most recently promoted tech leads in the SIG. They both were, I nominated both of them because of all their work on the entry framework, which suddenly got a ton of work the past couple of years. I still wouldn't recommend that people like reuse that thing, but I think there's been some good ideas brewed in there.
Okay.
Like I was just poking around in here now, and one thing that comes to mind that I would suggest you might want to poke some folks about and see about kind of copying the idea into here is the host exec pod trick. I didn't see anything for that poking around the current state of the Kubernetes SIG's E2E framework, and that's been a really useful thing that we've moved towards
No,
in
actually,
E2E framework.
so one of the contribution was about pod exec, and I'm wondering if whoever
I need to find the host exec pod stuff again, dig that up. It's been a little while since I looked at that.
Yeah.
But basically the idea is that you can use a privilege pod with the right configuration combined with NSEnter to using only the Kubernetes API, no SSH access to execute things on the host. And we've been migrating towards that as one of the ways we're trying to get rid of all the broken provider contexts in the core framework. And this has been working really well for us. You basically just create a pod that is crafted to allow you to get away with execing things as if you were just execing directly to the underlying node. That is a really useful, pretty portable trick. It won't work on all clusters. There are going to be clusters that like block this sort of behavior. But if you have sufficient privileges, just using the Kubernetes API, you can do that. So almost everywhere that we were using SSH to do things like check mounts on the nodes or whatever, moved this. I think for like application devs, this is less relevant, but for people that are building like critical add-ons for things like storage or networking, this is a really useful trick that we've been adopting in the core framework.
Okay. Yeah, that would be interesting. I'll dig. Is that? I'm not sure. I see.
Yeah, that link in that Brady posted is
okay. That's
what I was
it.
talking about. Yeah, this is a very neat little magic trick.
Ben, is there a larger scale project, something called in-tree? Because I don't see any in-tree thee. I don't know what that is.
Oh, sorry. That just shorthand for being in the main Kubernetes repo. We talk a lot about projects being in tree or out of tree. So like the Kubernetes SIG's repo would be out of tree. We try to encourage a lot more things to be out of tree now,
right?
So they can develop at their own pace.
So someone contributed in this release something called exec and pod. So I'm wondering if they're reusing. I'll look at the code, but I'll dig to see if it's the same thing, because it may already be have been contributed to.
I would guess it'll wind up looking almost the same, but this is like a specific variant of execing in a pod. You're leveraging a specific pod that's and command wrapping that's been crafted to allow you to escape to the host. You're like intentionally escaping from a pod to the host so that you can do things like you can expect mounts or the network state or whatever, but in a relatively portable way that's only using the Kubernetes API and isn't depending on out of band things like SSH access.
And is Patrick discussing that at all in the blog post?
I don't think so. That's kind of been like a smaller subset of what we've been doing. We've been trying to prod for the in-tree tests. We mostly find this for storage and networking related things. The other controllers tend to not need to do this, but you could imagine needing to do this for developing things like storage add-ons.
Yeah. Okay. I'll dig through that link that under host exec util to see because one of the things I wanted to do and I'm pushing for with this project too is to kind of integrate kind of a strong word, but make sure that we're leveraging other tools. Like somebody is already looking into using the Quark project as a way of, instead of running Kind, which I think Quark kind of started something like Kind in the background. But Quark, we're looking into integrating with Quark. We've done it with kubetest 2. So anything that helps, that stays and reach out in the ecosystem and makes it easy, I'm definitely looking into that.
Yeah, I think we have just a few of these actually good ideas that are in the in-tree framework that may make sense to clone over here. The host exec is one. I think you have a lot of the other things like that, how to wait on things properly. Most of what Patrick's talking about here is just like the approach to doing things reliably, whereas this is more of a like, how do we make it more portable and get away from all the brittle like per cloud
Right.
provider specific code paths.
Right. Yeah, I do remember way back when he wrote a previous blog that was kind of on the same path, but it seems like now it's even more taking it further. Yeah, I see he's talking about polling and timeouts, long waiting times.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we connect you with Antonio and Patrick, Aoja and Pioli. They both have done a lot of work on the entry one recently, and there's probably a few other ideas like this that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head that are worth looking at and seeing if they can be of use for the
Yeah,
nice
absolutely.
framework.
Absolutely. I'll definitely reach out to Patrick. When I was doing storage way back when we crossed paths, so I definitely reach out to him. Yeah, and I'm looking at the blog. It looks like some of the stuff, like it looks like they're directly built in Kinkgo now, like the waiting and the polling and stuff like that.
Yeah, we actually had the author the core maintainer came and interacted with Sig-Testing for a while over the past year leading into Ginkgo v2 to like get some feedback and took a lot of suggestions. And you know, it was fun because a lot of us have had some frustration with it over the years, but it was some good back and forth, and the core the framework in the Kubernetes repo has adopted some of these Ginkgo v2
Right.
improvements now. And I think you know, there's good ideas in the midst
Absolutely.
of the mess.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I can see a little bit of overlap with what's already in the E2E framework, but definitely stuff like exec, pod exec, and running stuff directly on the node. We definitely need to look into that, and I'm always looking for ideas anyway. So that's
the
good.
trickiest one off the top of my head that was I've been like, oh, we should like, you know, document this better. This is a good idea. I mean, it's a good bad idea. abusing
Yeah.
abusing some functionality, but
Right.
I would guess that between the two of them there's a couple more of these that I'm not thinking of since I haven't spent as much time on it recently.
Cool. All right, awesome. Thank you for the heads up.
Thank you for working on this. I'm really glad that there's a place for people to collaborate on the outer tree one. My focus has usually been on Kubernetes itself, but like we want to be able to provide good practices. But every time someone would come and talk to us, we're like, don't use the thing where you don't use it. We're stuck with it. Don't use it.
Right. And if you try to use it, you'll see why. I mean, very quickly. So yeah. All right, cool. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're good to call it there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the lively discussion. And have a good rest of the week. Take care.